All of us are living through what is probably the most devastating economic crisis we will ever see. It is very important for us to understand why this happened, how this might affect our lives, and how to prevent something like this from happening. Now, at a very fundamental level, if I had to explain to you why did the crisis of 2008 happen, the four-letter answer to that is debt. People borrowed way too much money than they could repay, and when the time came for them to repay their loans, they could not repay, and everything started collapsing like a pack of cards. Now you would ask me, why would that happen? Aren't people smart? Don't they know that they should not take a loan that they can't repay? Well, the answer is not that simple, and I'll show you why it's a more convoluted answer. Now, sometimes to understand the present or the future, we need to step into the past, and that's what we'll have to do, because the seeds of the current economic crisis were sown a decade back in the year 1999 and 2000. I'm sure you're familiar with the infamous dot-com technology boom and bust of the year 2000. This was the year where in Silicon Valley, lots of technology companies were valued at ridiculous valuations, which were not justified by their revenues and profits. And then finally the markets caught up to the act. The entire economic crash. You see this here, the NASDAQ, the S&P, and virtually every stock market out there crashed, and we had a recession for about 4 years. Now, when the whole 2000 dot-com bubble burst, the American government and other governments across the world were trying to figure out how to get out of this crisis. And one of the most common ways to get out of an economic crisis is to encourage people to spend more money so that money is circulating in the system. So how do you encourage people to spend more money? You give them cheap money. And how do you give them cheap money? You bring down interest rates. So when the government or the Federal Reserve or the Reserve Bank of India brings down the interest rates, all the other dependent interest rates come down. Your home loan rates, your car loan rates, your personal loan rates, all of that come down, and all of a sudden money is available cheaply. Now when money is available cheaply, people take the money and go and spend it on things that they wouldn't otherwise spend on. They would go buy a car, they would go buy a house, they would go buy a second house. And when all of this happened, the economy rebounds back. And that's exactly what happened a decade back in 2003, 2004. The reduction in interest rates had the desired effect, and the economy started rising back somewhere around 2004. But unknown to a lot of people and ignored by many other experts, that reduction in interest rate was actually beginning to cause the current economic crisis we are going through. And why and how, I'll show you. Now, around the year 2000, if you had to take a home loan in the United States, you had to pay 8% interest on a 20-year or a 30-year home loan. Over a period of 6 years, because the American government was bringing down the interest rates to pep up the economy, you could get the same home loan for 5%. So all of a sudden what happened was that since it was easy to get a home loan, a lot of people went to buy houses. And it is the basic economic supply and demand theory. When there's a lot of demand and there's limited supply, prices go up. And that's exactly what happened. Average prices across the United States went up by 30%, 40%, in some areas 2 times and 3 times, right? And so when that happened, when a lot of people, because the interest rates came down, a lot of people started buying the houses so that they could own houses. So when a lot of people started buying the houses and the supply of houses were low, the prices of houses went up. So when the prices of houses went up, everybody thought, oh wow, real estate is an outstanding investment. Let me also go buy houses. So it was this infinite, ridiculous loop where the prices went up, people kept buying houses because of the prices went up, and it just went so on and so forth. Now, when that happened, when the interest rates kept coming down, banks were lending money to people without much due diligence or scrutiny. After lending money to the most credit-worthy bunch of people, the banks started focusing on this section of American society called the subprime customers. Now, subprime customers are essentially people who don't necessarily have the capacity to pay back these huge loans, and that's why they're called subprime. They don't have the capacity because they don't have proper jobs, they are not very well educated, they might have unstable income. For many of those reasons, banks traditionally have been very conservative to lend to that group of people. But in the last decade, since banks were making lots of money giving home loans and they exhausted the top tier of customers, banks started lending money to the subprime people whom normally they would not have given loans to. And to make things worse, banks would incentivize these people with things like teaser rates. A teaser rate is something where the bank will tell you, hey, you want $1 million a home loan? No worries, no down payment, here's your $1 million. For the first 2 years or the first 3 years, your interest rate is going to be 1% or even 0%, no interest payments the first 3 years. But after the third year, your interest is going to be 6%. Now, a lot of people really got teased with these teaser rates, took these loans, excited that they could own a house today and didn't have to pay any interest over 3 years, and everybody assumed the price of the house was going to go up anyway, so I could always maybe take another loan and pay back my current loan or sell the house or any of those factors. Now, and we'll see what happened to those predictions. Now, what these banks smartly did was the loans that they gave the customers, they did not keep it to themselves. They took those loans, and to pass the risk away, they gave those loans to other bigger Wall Street investment banks like the Morgan Stanleys, Credit Suisse, and Goldman Sachs of the world to move risk away from their company to those banks. Now, those banks took those loans and they cut them up and they gave it to other people. And that went around and around the system until every bank out there was holding some form of this high-risk subprime loans. That's where it all started happening. Then you get to 2005, 2006. What's happening? All the loans that were taken in 2004, 2005 with all the teaser rates, around 2006, 2007, the teaser rates all got over and the real interest rates kicked in. So on $1 million, a 6% interest would be all of a sudden you had to pay $60,000 a year or $5,000 a month. Even for the most white collar of American families, that's a huge money. So what happened? People didn't have any money to pay back their loans all of a sudden, and everybody started defaulting on their loans. A lot of people started defaulting on their loans. And because people started defaulting on their loans, there was all of a sudden a huge supply of homes in the market because banks were taking over houses and foreclosing them. So all of a sudden there were a lot of houses available in the market. And because a lot of houses were available in the market, the price of real estate started crashing. Now, when that started happening, it started sending out this devastating ripple effect across the economy. But the first people to face that ripple effect were the banks themselves. Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers, one of the most legendary, most respected investment banks, were the first ones to get affected. And why did two investment banks on Wall Street get affected? Because somebody in Florida or California did not pay their home loan? That's because apart from people borrowing from each other, the banks were borrowing from each other. So if a Mr. Mark Jacobs in Florida did not pay his monthly EMI of $4,000 to his local Wells Fargo bank, that Wells Fargo bank cannot pay Bear Stearns properly, from whom they borrowed money. And then because they couldn't pay Bear Stearns, and this is kind of what happened, for example, because this person did not have money, she couldn't pay Wells Fargo her EMI. Now Wells Fargo probably borrowed money from Goldman Sachs, so they couldn't pay Goldman Sachs their money. Now Goldman Sachs probably borrowed money from Lehman Brothers. Now because of that, Goldman Sachs can't pay Lehman Brothers any money. Lehman Brothers is probably trading with Barclays and HSBC in Australia and England. So Barclays and HSBC are stuck with no money. Now HSBC is probably trading with ICICI Bank. So ICICI Bank is stuck with no money. Or Barclays is probably trading with Credit Suisse and Banco Santander. And you see what happens. This is what is called a global systemic collapse, which happened over the last 4 or 5 years. Because millions of such individuals were not able to pay their loan EMIs, this whole chain reaction got set up around the world and banks started collapsing one by one. So now you will ask me, all right, so what if banks start collapsing? How did that affect my life? Now what really happens is that when something like a bank collapses, number one, the stock markets collapse because the sentiment is affected. Banks are huge financial institutions. If they collapse, stock markets start collapsing. If stock markets start collapsing, people are psychologically negatively affected and they start investing less and they start saving less, leave alone the fact that a lot of people have lost most of their net worth because their house prices have decreased. Now when people start losing jobs and spending less money, what happens? They buy fewer products. When people buy fewer products, what happens? Companies make lesser money and lesser profits. When companies make lesser money and lesser profits, they have very little to no money to spend on things like new jobs or bonuses or promotions or expanding on new infrastructure and things like that. And because of that, what happens, if you were sitting in Bombay and had no clue, had never heard of Marc Jacobs in Florida, this is how that person not paying his or her EMI affects you. It affects the banks. Because of the banks, the stock markets get affected. Because of that, people spend less. Because of that, companies don't have enough money. Because of that, they don't expand. Because of that, there is no IT outsourcing business to an Infosys, and because of which Infosys stock tanked 40% during this time period. That brings us to the end of this session. Hopefully you have a good understanding of why the current economic crisis took place. Thank you very much for your time. We will see you again soon.